Dawn slithers across the polished marble like a blade of pale fire, cutting through the cold air of the chamber. 3 officials, silent, immovable, stand in the shadows as though carved from obsidian. Their eyes never soften, their breath never betrays emotion, and before them, a girl barely past childhood shivers beneath the weight of a ritual she never asked to bear. The incense burns thick and sweet, masking the scent of sweat and fear, yet nothing can hide the tremor in her hands or the hollow ache swelling inside her chest. She knows the truth. Her fate was sealed long before she learned what the word fate even meant. No window opens outward. No corridor leads to escape. Every direction points back toward the same unbreakable truth. Her body has become a signature on a treaty she never consented to sign. And somewhere deep within her, where the last embers of hope flicker, a question claws its way into existence. How many empires have been built upon the silent suffering of girls like her? But to understand this moment, this cold, breathless dawn, you must follow the threads that stretch far beyond this chamber. You must step back into the age when the world wrapped its cruelty in gold and silk, calling oppression tradition and human sacrifice necessity. From the towering gates of the Ottoman Empire, where princesses were raised not as daughters, but as bargaining chips, to the velvet-draped courts of Renaissance Italy, where the Borgia name shone brighter than the truth it buried, the bodies of young women became the currency of power. In the empire of the Nile, beneath the watchful eyes of gods carved in sandstone, children were surrendered to temples and rituals said to ensure divine favor. Behind every luxurious facade stood a machinery of control, quiet, ruthless, perfected over centuries. The world remembers the palaces, the art, the victories, but it forgets the trembling hands behind the curtains, the muffled sobs echoing in training halls, the prayers whispered by girls who did not yet know the meaning of captivity. Chroniclers praised the brilliance of sultans and popes, but seldom recorded the names of the daughters they bartered away. Those daughters lived in the footnotes, if they lived at all, and so the girl in the marble chamber is not alone. She carries the weight of thousands before her, Ottoman princesses drilled into obedience by eunuchs who believed submission was virtue, noble brides in Renaissance courts, examined by physicians like livestock before a political wedding, temple servants in Egypt stripped of their birth names to serve gods they never chose. All of them were raised behind the walls of institutions that claimed to protect them, yet stole everything that made them human. As the officials step closer, their shadows stretching long across the floor, the girl's heartbeat becomes the drum that begins this forgotten history. And now you must ask yourself, what kind of world allowed this? And more importantly, why did no one speak their names? The girl in the marble chamber is not the first to tremble beneath the eyes of authority, nor will she be the last. Her story begins years earlier, long before the dawn that now betrays her fear. It begins in the labyrinth of the imperial harem, an empire within an empire, where every breath, every gesture, every heartbeat is shaped by rules older than memory itself. When she first arrived, she was no more than a child, clutching a fragment of home in the folds of her memory. The gates of Topkapi swallowed her whole, their shadows stretching across her small body like a prophecy. Eunuchs guided her through the corridors, their footsteps soft yet absolute. They were the silent architects of obedience. They taught her how to lower her gaze, how to stand without shaking, how to hide her thoughts so deeply that even she might someday forget where she buried them. Her mornings began before the sun. A bell, low and hollow, vibrated through the stone walls. She and the other girls would rise together, moving like a river of silk toward the training hall. There, Under the stern watch of elder attendants, they learned the art of stillness. A princess must not tremble. A future bride of empire must not show fear. A political offering must not reveal pain. Their bodies belonged to diplomacy long before they understood diplomacy's cruelty. Meals were sparse, measured, and intentional, designed not for nourishment but control. Every step they took, every posture they held, every facial expression they were allowed to make became the property of the palace. Even their laughter, if ever released, was trained into something polite, soft, almost soundless. Joy too loud was dangerous. Joy too real was forbidden. Punishments were never shouted. They were quiet, precise, and impossible to forget. A misstep meant isolation. A raised voice meant weeks in the cold stone chamber where no sunlight reached. And through it all, the eunuchs recorded every behavior as though documenting livestock. Not one of the girls was treated as a person. Each was a possible piece on the imperial chessboard. But the cruelty most of them never spoke of was the inspection chamber, the place where innocence met the machinery of empire. It was a room of polished walls and no windows, a room where a girl learned, perhaps for the first time, that her worth to the world outside these walls had nothing to do with her heart, her mind, or her dreams. The younger ones cried. The older ones held their breath. All of them understood that resistance was not allowed, not because they lacked courage, but because courage had no place to survive in a system designed to crush it. And yet, even within this suffocating world, moments of humanity flickered like dying candles. A hand held under the blankets during a night of fear. A whispered story about a family they hoped still remembered them. A scrap of cloth passed between dormitories, embroidered not with gold, but with hope. These small rebellions, fragile as they were, reminded them that they had not yet become what the palace wanted them to become. Silent vessels of political ambition. But the training was relentless. It shaped their bodies, their thoughts, their futures. It forged them into symbols, not daughters, into treaties, not girls. And now, standing in the chamber at dawn, the girl realizes that everything she endured, the discipline, the inspections, the silences, has led to this moment, a moment where she must become exactly what the empire has prepared her to be. But tell me, what kind of empire requires the breaking of children to hold itself together? And how many lives were sacrificed at the altar of political necessity? The chamber where the girl now stands is not unique. Across distant empires and glittering courts, rooms just like this one existed. Rooms where power was exercised not through swords, but through the quiet humiliation of the powerless. In the Ottoman palace, in the Renaissance mansions of Italy, in the sanctuaries of ancient kingdoms, the same pattern echoed: a young woman, a gathering of officials, and a ritual meant to transform her into something useful. Tonight the marble feels colder than usual. The girl senses it beneath her bare feet, a chill that creeps upward like a warning. The officials remain perfectly still, their robes heavy with authority. They are not here to see her. They are here to confirm that she can fulfill a role chosen long before she learned to speak. Their presence fills the room like smoke, suffocating, invasive, unavoidable. And yet this chamber, oppressive as it is, reflects only one version of a broader cruelty woven through history. Centuries earlier, in the heart of Renaissance Italy, another young woman had stood beneath the weight of expectation. Her name would one day echo across Europe, Lucrezia Borgia. But before the legends, before the accusations and political maneuvering, there was the girl, exhausted, trembling, forced to endure a ritual she never asked for, surrounded by men who watched with the cold detachment of scholars inspecting their specimen. They took notes, whispered assessments, judged her value, as though she were an object upon which alliances rested. They did not speak her name with tenderness. They spoke it like a title in a ledger. History remembers Lucretia as a femme fatale, a conspirator, a seductress. But the truth buried beneath propaganda is far darker. She was used before she ever understood what use meant. And when she collapsed from exhaustion in a dimly lit room, breath shallow, skin fevered, the notaries and physicians who witnessed her suffering simply dipped their quills and continued writing. For them, her pain was not tragedy, only procedure. Thousands of miles away, in a different century, another girl experienced her own form of ritual scrutiny. She belonged not to a palace, but to a temple. In ancient courts where priests wielded as much authority as kings, children were presented as offerings to secure divine favor. A small Nubian girl with eyes wide as the night sky stood trembling as her hair was cut away, falling in soft, helpless spirals to the ground. Her name was taken, her identity was rewritten. She was told she now belonged to the gods, but the truth was simpler and far crueler. She belonged to the institution. No blade touched her skin, yet everything that made her herself was carved out of her existence. The girl now standing in the Ottoman chamber does not know these stories, but she feels the same invisible chains tightening around her ribs. She understands instinctively that she is part of a lineage of suffering, centuries of voices silenced, hopes extinguished, dreams reshaped to fit the will of powerful men. Outwardly, she remains motionless, as she was trained to be, but inside her mind spirals with the same questions generations before her dared not speak. Why must she be the offering? Why must her body carry the burden of empires? And why do those who witness her fear feel nothing at all? One of the officials steps forward. His shadow falls across her like a curtain, swallowing her last fragment of courage. His face shows no malice, only duty. Perhaps that is what makes this ritual even more monstrous. The cruelty here is not born of passion or hatred, but of cold routine. And somewhere in her chest, the girl realizes something devastating. The ritual is not meant to test her. It is meant to erase her. Long before the girl in the Ottoman chamber was even born, a different kind of ritual unfolded under the blazing sun of ancient Egypt. There, where the Nile carved its path through fields of gold and dust, another child was prepared for a destiny she could neither understand nor escape. Her village had been small, little more than a scattering of mud brick homes pressed against the desert wind. She remembered playing among the reeds, chasing dragonflies, listening to her mother hum lullabies that smelled of warm bread and river water. But one morning, everything changed. Priests, dressed in linen brighter than the sun, arrived with scrolls and proclamations, declaring that an omen had been seen in the stars. The gods were restless. A child must be chosen. And the girl with the night-dark eyes became the answer to a prophecy she had never heard. She was taken to the temple at Thebes, its towering walls covered in carvings of gods who watched with silent judgment. The columns rose so high that she felt the sky itself had been locked out, replaced by a ceiling painted with celestial symbols she did not recognize. To the priests, this was the center of the universe, a place where mortals touched divinity. To her, it was a fortress where echoes swallowed her voice whole. The initiation began at dawn. She was led into a courtyard where a basin of cold water waited. The stone beneath her feet was rough, biting into her skin with each hesitant step. The air smelled of myrrh and something metallic, something that reminded her of endings. A priest lifted a bronze blade, its edge curved like a crescent moon. She flinched, expecting pain, but the blade never touched her skin. Instead, it sliced through her hair, sending dark strands cascading to the ground like fallen feathers. She watched them fall, one by one, and felt her world unravel with each soft thud. Her hair had been her mother's pride. Now it was an offering. Her name was the next to vanish. The priests spoke in low, rhythmic chants, words rolling like thunder through the courtyard. They declared her reborn, claimed by the gods, no longer tied to her family or her past. A new name was given, one she did not recognize, one that tasted foreign in her mouth. When she tried to whisper her old name, the attendants pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her gently but unmistakably. From that moment on, she was no longer a child of her village. She was a vessel, a symbol, a servant of divine will. The walls of the temple would be her home. The priests would be her guardians. And the life she had known would fade into memory like a dream she could never return to. At night, she lay on a reed mat beneath flickering oil lamps. The shadows danced on the walls, shaped like the gods she was told to obey. She tried to remember her mother's face, her father's hands, the warmth of the sun on her skin as she ran through the fields, but the temple had a way of consuming memories, swallowing them just as surely as it swallowed names. Her days became a cycle of ritual tasks, carrying offerings, reciting hymns, learning to move with a precision that left no room for childhood. She was praised for her obedience, for her silence, for her transformation into something useful. But deep within her, a question pulsed like a heartbeat. If the gods were so powerful, why did they need a child to suffer in their name? The girl in the Ottoman chamber, centuries later, would never know this Egyptian child. But their stories were woven from the same thread, the quiet theft of identity, the reshaping of a human life into an instrument of power. The world has many ways of breaking a girl. Some use chains. Some use rituals. Some use silence. Across centuries and continents, empires rose and fell like tides. Yet one truth never changed. When men carved the map of the world, they used the bodies of women as ink. The girl in the Ottoman chamber does not know the stories of the others who came before her, but she feels the invisible net tightening around her. A net woven not of rope, but of politics. Every lesson she learned, every command she obeyed, every ritual she endured was preparing her for this moment. Not to live her own life, but to serve as a bridge between the ambitions of rulers. For the empire, a girl was not a daughter. She was a strategy. Far beyond Topkapi's gilded walls, Italy's Renaissance courts perfected this art into something almost theatrical. There, political marriages were staged like elaborate plays, each bride chosen not for love, but for her usefulness in securing alliances. The Borgia family mastered this practice. To them, a daughter's wedding was not a celebration. It was a negotiation, a declaration, a move on a board where the stakes were kingdoms. When Lucrezia Borgia was sent to marry yet another political partner, she was little more than a teenager. Her smile was rehearsed, her posture drilled into perfect composure, her destiny sealed by signatures she never saw. Behind the velvet curtains of the ducal halls, advisors whispered of dowries, of treaties, of military advantages. No one whispered of the girl's dreams. No one asked whether she feared the future. Fear was irrelevant. Dreams were irrelevant. She, like so many before her, had been reduced to a symbol, a token exchanged by men who believed power justified everything. But Italy was not alone. In Persia, royal families crafted alliances with equal precision. A daughter's marriage could unite tribes, calm rebellion, or silence an enemy. Some unions sealed peace agreements, others ensured loyalty from distant provinces. Always the same story. A girl walked down an aisle dressed in jewels, her expression serene, while her heart beat like a trapped bird beneath her ribs. To the crowd, she was radiant. To the diplomats, she was leverage. And in Egypt, even temple girls were considered assets. While they did not enter marriage alliances, their presence in rituals was seen as a guarantee of the state's sanctity. Their bodies served as offerings assuring divine favor. A different kind of diplomacy, but diplomacy all the same. Kings claimed the gods validated their rule, and the suffering of children became the silent evidence. From palace to cathedral, from sultan's court to desert temple, women were used to weave political futures. Some were treated gently, others brutally. But all shared the same fate. Their value was measured not in their humanity, but in what they could secure for the men who controlled them. The girl in the marble chamber senses this. She feels it in the way the officials study her not with cruelty, but with calculation. She is not being judged as a person. She is being assessed as a resource, one piece in a grand design. And this realization breaks something inside her. Not a scream, not a tear, but a quiet truth. She was never meant to belong to herself. Empires do not care for the hearts of the girls they trade. They care only for the alliances their bodies can forge. And as history turns its pages, these girls disappear, swallowed by treaties, forgotten in footnotes. Yet the weight of what they carried remains, shaping borders, shaping dynasties, shaping the world you live in now. When you look at the great empires of history, their monuments gleam with triumph. The Ottoman domes rising like golden suns over the Bosphorus, the Renaissance palaces glittering with frescoes and marble, the Egyptian temples carved with the names of gods who promised eternity. But beneath these wonders lies a silence so vast it could swallow civilizations whole. Because while the world admires the splendor, few pause to ask, who paid the hidden cost? People imagine the harem as a paradise of silk and luxury, where every desire was fulfilled. They picture Renaissance courts as refined havens of art and intellect. They imagine ancient temples as sacred places untouched by human cruelty. But when you strip away the illusions, when you peel back the embroidery and gold, what remains is stark, raw, and suffocating. The harem was not a playground. It was a cage with velvet bars. The Renaissance court was not a theater of romance. It was a marketplace of daughters. And the temples of Egypt, beneath their hymns and incense, were not sanctuaries. They were factories where childhood was reshaped into obedience. Different lands, different rituals, different languages. Yet each empire crafted the same machine, a system that consumed young women and children for the sake of stability, prestige, or divine favor. The consequences were not merely personal, they were geopolitical. A single arranged marriage could decide a war. A single girl's acceptability could secure an alliance. A single child dedicated to a temple could justify a king's divine right to rule. History books speak of treaties as though they were crafted from logic and diplomacy. But in truth, many were written upon the bodies of girls, whose names no chronicler ever bothered to record. And what of the psychological consequences? Those rarely make it into the official narratives. The Ottoman princess who grew up believing her worth depended on perfection. The Italian bride who learned that her tears held no political weight. The Egyptian temple child who forgot her own name because the priest told her the gods demanded it. Their suffering did not end with them. Fear, silence, and trauma ripple across generations. Children raised by mothers who were denied agency inherit an unspoken legacy of caution. Families torn apart by political marriages carry wounds that last centuries. Whole cultures normalize the belief that women should sacrifice themselves for the greater good. And what of society? A world that trades its daughters learns to accept cruelty as order. A world that teaches girls to stay silent raises boys who believe silence is their right. A world that honors monuments instead of victims becomes blind to its own capacity for violence. Even today, echoes remain. In traditions that disguise control as honor. In expectations that force women into roles they never chose. In rituals that survive not because they are sacred, but because they are familiar. The girl in the marble chamber, the one whose fate is hanging in the silence between breaths, stands at the intersection of all these histories. She is not merely an individual 13, trapped in a single moment. She is the embodiment of every child ever shaped, bent, or broken by systems that valued stability above humanity. And as she waits for her future to be decided by men who see her as a symbol instead of a soul, one truth becomes painfully clear. Empires are not built on stone alone. They are built on the backs of those the world was never meant to see. So now you must ask yourself, when you admire the triumphs of history, the palaces, the temples, the dynasties, do you also see the shadows cast by the forgotten girls who held those empires up? Or have their voices been silenced for so long that the world no longer remembers they ever spoke? History often hides its cruelty behind the beauty of its accomplishments. The marble halls, the golden domes, the intricate frescoes, all of them whisper stories of triumph. But triumph without truth becomes illusion. And illusions, if left unchallenged, repeat themselves. The girl in the marble chamber may belong to a bygone empire, but the forces that shaped her fate have not vanished. They have simply changed their faces. For centuries, societies wrapped control in the language of honor, tradition, or divine purpose. They claimed that sacrificing the freedom of a few could protect the many. They justified suffering as necessity. They trained generations to believe that obedience was virtue and silence was dignity. But when you look closer, you begin to understand the true lesson hidden beneath these centuries of ritual and manipulation. Cruelty survives not because it is powerful, but because it is familiar. The Ottoman princess, who learned to hide her thoughts so deeply that she no longer recognized them. The Renaissance bride who understood that her smile was a performance, not a choice. The Egyptian child who was told that her new name was a blessing, when in truth it was a theft. Their stories reveal a pattern older than any empire. A pattern in which innocence becomes collateral, identity becomes negotiable, and people become vessels for ambitions that are not their own. And if the world does not confront these patterns, they continue quietly, in new rituals, new institutions, new expectations. Look at the world around you. There are still places where a girl's future is decided before she learns to read. Still families that view daughters as tools for alliances, not through royal treaties, but through unspoken obligations. Still systems that shape women into roles they did not choose, then punish them for failing to fit the mold. Still traditions that claim to protect purity, while erasing the very voices they were meant to honor. And the most dangerous part? Much of it is done without malice. Like the officials in the marble chamber, many continue harmful practices because they believe they are simply fulfilling their duties. Cruelty delivered without hatred is often the hardest to uproot. But history also offers another lesson, one often forgotten beneath the weight of suffering. Change begins when silence ends. In the ruins of ancient temples, archaeologists have found graffiti carved by unnamed hands, small, quiet rebellions against systems that claimed absolute power. In dusty archives, letters from Renaissance women reveal attempts to negotiate their own destinies, even when the world dismissed their voices. In palaces long abandoned, inscriptions suggest that some princesses found ways to influence politics from within their gilded cages. Even in the darkest systems, sparks of resistance flickered, and today those sparks have the chance to become flames. Modern laws, education, and global awareness offer tools that past generations could only dream of. Yet tools alone are not enough. Change requires the courage to recognize echoes of ancient oppression in present-day practices and the will to break them. So you must ask yourself, what rituals of control still survive around you disguised as tradition? What expectations remain unquestioned because that's how things have always been? How many people today carry the quiet suffering of forgotten girls, hidden behind polite smiles and learned silence? The future is shaped not only by grand movements, but by simple choices: to question, to protect, to listen, to speak. By acknowledging the shadows of history, you make room for a world where girls are born not as offerings, but as individuals, with names that no one can take away, with futures they choose for themselves. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Empires rise when people are silenced. Humanity rises when people are finally allowed to speak. And so the girl in the marble chamber becomes more than a single story. She becomes a mirror, reflecting every forgotten daughter, every silenced voice, every life reshaped by systems that valued power more than people. Her fear, her stolen choices, her quiet endurance, they are not relics of the past, but warnings carved into the bones of history. Remember her when you look at palaces. Remember her when you read of great kings and celebrated dynasties. Remember that behind every shining empire lies a shadow it prefers you not to see. If her story moves you, if it forces you to question what else history chose to hide, then stay with us. Like this video, share it, and subscribe to uncover more forgotten chronicles buried beneath centuries of silence. And tell us, what stories from your own culture remain locked in the shadows, waiting for someone to finally speak their name?